Bye!
Hello, I am Nathaniel Yamaguchi. I am the lead designer on Arkham Asylum and most of the products available in this current Kickstarter.
So, James and Hunter Wooten asked, if licensing and permissions weren't an issue, what DC character theme or storyline would you love to do a set on?
So there's definitely a lot of stuff in the DC universe that I think is cool and would make a great set. I think my number one thing I would love to do is Young Justice. So that was a super awesome cartoon back in the day. It's something we haven't been able to get the okay on from DC, but it's definitely at the top of my list of things I would love to do.
James and Joe Shea asked, what are your top 5 favorite cards and why?
So there's a lot of cards I like, obviously, in this game. I'm going to pick some of the ones that stand out to me as ones that are super fun as far as I'm concerned for the game, or speak to me on effects that I like. So the first one is Engulfing Blaze, which is a superpower from the Rogues crossover pack, one of my favorite crossovers. That card gives you the option of destroying a card in your hand and lets you draw some cards if that card that you destroy has a VP value of 1 or greater. I definitely like card effects that give you this, is the cost worth to pay? So you're destroying a card that should be worth 2 or more power, but can the cards you draw generate more power for you in that situation? So those kind of effects of, how much better is that this card's in my deck versus what's in my hand are things that I find fun. The next card is going to be Shimmer from Teen Titans. Shimmer is a 4-cost villain with an attack that causes an opponent to destroy a starter, and then they gain a weakness. So this falls in the category of cards I really like from a thematic standpoint. Shimmer can transmute things, and so the idea of transmuting a starter into a weakness gets that idea of being able to transform an opponent's card into something, and that was a fun attack from Teen Titans. Next one is Time Sphere, which is an equipment from the Legion of Superheroes. This one was one I always loved playing when we tested that crossover pack. What it does lets you take all the cards from the lineup and put them on the bottom of the main deck, and then it refills the lineup. And so I always get a kick out of the thought of, I hop in the Time Sphere, all the cards in the lineup change because we're going to a different time period, and then 5 new cards pop out, and that just always seemed super, super cool for me from a design point. Next one is going to be the Deathstroke supervillain from the base set. So, back in 2012, when we were first testing DC-1, this was the supervillain attack that always amused me the most. Deathstroke lets you destroy, or causes you to destroy a card with cost 1 or greater in your hand or discard pile, I think it was what it was. Oftentimes, the best choices for that first appearance attack was either a Robin or a Kid Flash or something like that. So seeing Deathstroke kill Teen Titans was always very amusing to me and on theme for him. So I was always happy whenever I could destroy a Kid Flash from Deathstroke's attack, and I always just think back to the kids game, Jeff Johns' Teen Titans story from the 2000s, where Kid Flash takes a shotgun shell to the knee from Deathstroke, and it was just perfection for me from a gameplay standpoint. And the last one will be a card we'll talk about from Arkham Asylum, so another preview for this one. So we already talked about my favorite card from Arkham Asylum in a previous video. If you haven't seen that one, check that one out. My second favorite card in Arkham Asylum is Death Trap. So this is a 4-cost equipment. It's an attack. This one is a Riddler-themed card. What the attack does is each foe has to answer the question, does the top card of your deck cost 3 or more? If they guess right, good job, you move on. If you get the question wrong, though, you end up getting a weakness card. And so this was a fun thing. I wish we had been able to do more of these in the set, but this is a fun thing of the Riddler asks you a question, can you answer the question right or not? If you don't, something bad happens to you. So I really love the theming on that one.
Preston Gray asks, what was your favorite or most memorable set to work on?
So there's definitely a lot of sets that I have super fond memories of. Looking back at all the years of working on DC deck building, I think my personal favorite is the Teen Titans Go set. Blasphemy spoilers here. I actually was not super familiar with the cartoon before working on this game, but watching through the episodes and learning about what happened in it made me a fan of the cartoon. And it's one of the sets that I'm kind of most happy with how it turned out. The recruiting sidekicks mechanism that we had in that set is super fun. So if you're not familiar with the Teen Titans Go, each player plays as one of the core members, so Starfire, Raven, Beast Boy, Cyborg, or Robin. And then the other characters, the other Teen Titan characters, are set up to the side, and each of the character cards are double-sided, so you have the superhero side that you play as, and the back side has the sidekick side. And then every sidekick basically has something they want. So they want equipment, or they want superpowers. And so if you can offer them the certain card types that they want, they will join your team. And so part of the game is recruiting the sidekicks, so the other Teen Titans, to your team to build up your team to give you more characters to play with. A fun part about that, though, is the alliances are sometimes short-lived because if your opponent is able to trigger their recruit ability, they can steal that sidekick and they'll join your opponent's team. And so having the sidekicks go back and forth was super fun. It's also a set that we kind of tried to streamline more. So if you're familiar with the set, the cards cost less than normal, and there's a little bit simpler text involved. And the thing that makes me happiest about that set is it is geared towards younger kids. And so whenever I hear a parent talk about how it's like one of their kids' favorite games and they get to spend time with their kids playing it, I just get all the feels about that.
Brian Powers asks, in the Shadows expansion, does it seem odd to have henchmen and hostages to play with heroes, or would you just add kit cards back in?
So I'll start with saying that one of the strengths of the Cerberus Heroes line is that it's very customizable. So you should play the game however you find it most fun. If you'd rather use the kit cards than the henchman cards, go for it. Me personally, I would definitely use the henchman cards because I like those more than the kit cards. And I don't really see a thematic disconnect with that. It's really just kind of changing the perspective. So sure, if I'm the supervillain, I'm hiring the henchmen and I'm taking the hostages. Whereas if I'm the superheroes, it's more like along the lines of, well, I'm protecting the hostages, so they're helping me out while I'm protecting them. Or if it's the henchmen, then it's, I'm misleading or using a henchman in some way to get at the supervillains. And so it's just kind of changing your perspective on how you're using these cards in order to defeat the supervillains or require more cards.
So James asks, why are they called hostages when some, like the Falcones, aren't really hostages, just civilians?
So interestingly, there was a point where it was a question of whether we should actually call these cards hostages or civilians. So interesting that you also bring up the same term we were debating between. In the end, we went with hostages because it's a more thematic term, and that the idea is you are taking these hostages and keeping them against their will. That's why we went with that. For the most part, all of the characters are basically characters that a supervillain could take hostage, even if it's Carmine Falcone or Sal Maroni. They may be mob bosses, but there's nothing stopping some crazy guy like the Joker from doing something that's probably not a good idea and take a mob boss hostage and have to deal with whatever the repercussions of that are going to be.
Brian Fried asks, do the sets get initiated by DC, Cryptozoic, or a combination? And will there ever be a chance for fans to suggest sets in the future?
For the most part, we approach DC with what sets we want to do. They then give us feedback on what characters we can use, what errors maybe we need to focus on for the theming of the sets. But for the most part, they don't really come to us and say, hey, do this set. It's we come to them and then they give us the okay or not. As far as backer influence, we definitely plan in the second half of the campaign to release a survey similar to what we did with Justice League Dark, where we'll have different themes or storylines that backers can give feedback on what they would like to see.
David Kane and Keith Kalbeck ask, what are the chances of getting larger Rebirth expansions to change up the main deck or add new campaigns like the cancelled Suicide Squad expansion?
So let's touch on the Suicide Squad expansion first. So that didn't get too far into development. We were mostly still in the conceptual stages of it. We were planning for it to be its own separate campaign. It would have some other new mechanics that maybe you could imagine would be relevant to a Suicide Squad set, but we didn't get into individual card designs or anything like that. So it was pretty early on that that one got canceled. As far as new content, I would definitely love to do more stuff for Rebirth. We've been doing the one-shots. As far as bigger expansions that change up the main deck or add new campaigns, that's not something we're currently planning to do. But if that is something you're interested in, feel free to post about it on the campaign page. And we will be having a poll soon, which is going to ask people for what their favorite sets are. So if the higher Rebirth is voted on those, the more likely it is to see more expansion content for that.
Dustin Lucas asks, are there any plans to put out additional content for Injustice in the near future?
So I love the Injustice set. That was a super fun set to work on, and there's definitely content that was left out from the first one that could potentially make it into a sequel. There's also a whole nother Injustice 2 game that could potentially be used for content. So I definitely hope that we'll be able to release more content for Injustice. There currently isn't any being worked on yet. Like I mentioned earlier, if you do want to see more Injustice content, be sure to rate Injustice high on your favorite base sets in the poll that we're going to eventually release.
CO asks, would we ever adapt the Cerberus engine to other licenses?
Great question. So we are definitely investigating other IPs that we could potentially use for a new Cerberus game. We hope to announce some things about that soon. No official details yet, but the answer is we are trying.
James asks, will we have reward style and playable Nemesis cards going forward?
So the plan is to support both the reward style Nemesis cards that give you an immediate effect when you defeat them and then go into your score pile, as well as have Nemesis cards that when you defeat them, they'll go into your discard pile and then you can play them on future turns. We know there are players that like one or the other, and we want to be able to provide new cards for both of those players.
James also asks, will playable Nemesis cards continue to have toned down effects going forward?
So that's definitely a philosophical shift we've been doing with newer sets. There definitely was a time back in the first few sets where Nemesis cards had super crazy off-the-wall effects that were very powerful. At the time, they were fun things to play with. DC deck building has always been about playing cool cards and doing cool things and feeling very powerful, and the first few sets definitely made you feel that way whenever you played one of the supervillain cards. For newer sets, we're trying to still have a lot of fun with the effects, but have more balanced experiences where the scores are maybe a little bit tighter and not have too many games where there might be a runaway leader problem, where Nemesis cards that are super strong mean it's more likely for you to beat another Nemesis, which then has that snowball effect of just getting stronger and stronger. Newer Nemesis cards that do have play effects, so they do go into your deck, on average will have weaker effects than the previous ones. Again, just so there's less of that snowball effect of when I play a supervillain, it basically guarantees I'm going to defeat another supervillain.
Connor Hennessy asks, will you continue to release high complexity sets?
So if we're looking at the general complexity of the last few sets between Arkham Asylum, Justice League Dark, and Injustice, they're definitely a higher complexity level than the earlier sets like DC1, Heroes Unite, and Forever Evil. We've definitely skewed more towards simpler in the first few sets. Over the years, though, we expect that our player base has kind of grown and maybe has some interest in a little bit more complexity. We're also trying to reach a broader audience as well, people who maybe want a little more decision space in their games. And so the average complexity of newer sets is likely to be higher than it was for the first few years. We aren't planning to go too much more complex than where we're at right now, and so that's probably what you should expect for the sets going forward.
Dean Harris asks, would it be possible to get starter cards for other oversized cards?
No. Okay, to actually answer the question, the unique starter cards were a thing we added to Arkham Asylum for folks who aren't aware of that yet. All of the new characters in the Arkham Asylum base set and expansion will have their own unique starter cards that replaces a punch in their deck. This is kind of one of those things where we do new stuff in sets and we're not entirely sure what people are going to love and not love. And so this is definitely something that we've seen a lot of interest in. Considering we have 200 to 300 characters already released previously, that's definitely a lot of characters that we would need to design cards for, test cards for, get art for. And so it's definitely something outside of the scope of the campaign. It's definitely something we'll consider going forward, of maybe as we make new characters, we'll also throw unique starter cards in for them as a possibility, but definitely not something we have at the time right now to make for previous characters.
Thank you so much. Thank you for answering all these questions.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you folks for submitting your questions. Feel free to post more on the Kickstarter and we'll get to them when we can.